Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in our series. The night when a quiet visit turned into a heartbreaking confession, a fake pregnancy, and a truth no one expected. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what happens next. Late in the afternoon, warm golden light spilled across the small wooden home where Tu Tieu and Uri had finally begun to find their balance again. Months of non-stop startup responsibilities, sleepless nights with their newborn, and the chaos of learning to be new parents had pushed them to their limits. But now, slowly, their world was settling, softening into something peaceful, something hopeful. They didn't know that a storm was already on its way, and the saddest part was that it wasn't coming from an enemy, but from someone they once trusted like family. As the sun dipped lower, a knock sounded at the door. When Uri opened it, Lynn stood there, eyes swollen, makeup smudged, lips trembling like she'd been holding back tears for hours. Right behind her was Ms. Lynn, her adoptive mother, her face tight with worry, as though she'd already sensed something was terribly wrong. The moment Lynn stepped inside, she avoided everyone's eyes. She clasped her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white, and after a shaky breath, she looked directly at Uri. "Uri, I've had feelings for you for a long time," she whispered, the words cracking in her throat. "I can't keep pretending anymore. I know you and Tu Tieu are happy, but I need to say it just once. I love you." The room fell silent so suddenly, it felt like all the air had been sucked out. Uri didn't explode. He didn't even look confused. Instead, he simply let out a slow breath and looked at her steadily, hurt but firm. "Lynn, I've never loved anyone but Tu Tieu," he said softly, "and I never will. I've been honest about that from the start. I'm sorry you're hurting, but nothing will change that." The gentleness of his voice only made her eyes fill again. Ms. Lynn stepped forward to place a hand on her daughter's shoulder, hoping to ground her, but Lynn jerked away as if the touch burned. Her chest heaved, and then, as if something inside her snapped, her voice suddenly rose, sharp, slicing through the room like a crack of thunder. "But I'm pregnant," she cried. "It's your baby, Uri. You can't leave me." The words hit the room like an explosion. Ms. Lynn's face went pale. Her hands shook as she turned toward Uri, her voice trembling with shock. "Uri, what have you done?" Uri blinked, frozen in disbelief, not because he thought it might be true, but because he couldn't comprehend why Lynn would lie about something this serious. "Mom, Lynn," he said, steady but stunned. "This isn't true. None of it. I haven't done anything. I would never betray Tu Tieu." But Ms. Lynn's confusion only deepened. She turned back to her daughter, her tone cracking under the weight of fear and disbelief. "Lynn, tell me the truth. Why are you saying Uri is the father? What proof do you have?" Just then, in the tense, suffocating silence, Lynn's phone started buzzing. Once, twice, then continuously, an endless vibrating hum that filled the room. Ms. Lynn flinched. Instinctively, as she had done ever since she adopted Lynn, she reached for the phone to silence it. The moment the screen lit up, several messages popped into view. "Did you finish the fake ultrasound yet? The picture from yesterday still looks photoshopped. Make sure you delete the messages. You're really trying to use this to pull Uri back? This is too risky." Ms. Lynn's entire body went still, her face drained of color. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. When she turned toward Lynn, her eyes were filled not with anger, but with heartbreak. "Lynn," she whispered, voice barely holding together. What is this?" Lynn's face twisted with panic as she lunged forward. "Mom, give it back. It's not what you think." But Uri stepped in, taking the phone before she could reach it. He scanned the messages, let out a long, exhausted breath, and asked quietly, "So this is why you said you were pregnant?" The calmness in his voice was more devastating than shouting. Tu Tieu stood beside him, stunned, confused, unable to understand why Lynn, who had once been like a sister, would go this far. Why she would destroy herself and everyone else just to chase something impossible. Lynn trembled violently, her fingers digging into her palms until they turned ghostly white. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I just didn't know what else to do," she choked out. "I love you, Uri. I love you so much. I didn't want to lose you." For the first time, Ms. Lan's knees nearly gave out. Uri caught her before she fell. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, helping her to the couch. "I didn't want you to get dragged into this." Ms. Lan shook her head, tears dripping freely. "No, Uri, it's not you. It's her. I raised her with kindness and trust, and she chose to lie about something like this. Lynn, you've shattered my heart." Lynn cried harder, but her sobbing no longer moved anyone. The truth, undeniable and ugly, was right there on the screen. No arguments, no explanations, no more lies left to tell. The room felt heavy, suffocating, filled with hurt, disappointment, and exhaustion. But beneath all that pain was a quiet sigh of relief. At least the truth was out. At least no more damage could be done. Ms. Lan wiped her tears and finally spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "Come home with me, Lynn. Starting today, you must face the consequences of what you've done." Lynn shook her head desperately, lip trembling. "I just wanted him to notice me. I love him too much. I didn't want him to leave me." "Lynn," Ms. Lan snapped, her voice breaking. "How far were you planning to go? How many people were you willing to hurt just to force someone to love you?" Lynn sobbed into her hands, but no one reached out to comfort her. Not anymore. Ms. Lan let out a long, weary breath, then turned back to Uri. Her tone softened through her tears. "Uri, I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. You've always been a good man, and yet I doubted you." But Uri shook his head gently. "It's okay, Mom. You were trying to protect Lynn. Anyone would have reacted the same." Those words only made Ms. Lan cry harder, a mix of guilt and heartbreak. She looked at Lynn one last time and said quietly, "You need to leave for a while. Not because I hate you, but because staying here will only make this worse. You need to learn that love can't be forced. Not everyone you love will belong to you." Lynn lifted her head, eyes red and empty. She looked at her mother, then at Uri and Tu Tieu, standing together like an unshakable wall. And in that moment, she knew, truly knew, that she had already lost, long before today. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The heavy click behind her sounded like the end of a chapter no one wanted to write. The moment Lynn stepped out and the door clicked shut behind her, the entire house seemed to exhale. A fragile silence hung in the air, stretched thin after everything that had just happened. Uri stood frozen for a moment before slowly easing himself onto the couch, elbows on his knees, burying his face into his hands. He didn't cry, but the weight in his chest felt like something far heavier than tears. Tu Tieu quietly walked over and sat beside him, her presence calm and grounding, but even she felt the shock lingering in her bones. Neither spoke for a while. There was nothing to say. Not yet. The truth had come out, but the emotional wreckage still lay scattered all around them. Finally, Uri lifted his head, his eyes tired but steady again. "I never wanted any of this to happen," he murmured. "I don't understand how she reached this point." Tu Tieu placed a gentle hand on his back. "You didn't do anything wrong. She made her choices. We just got caught in the impact." Uri let out a long, shaky breath. "The fake pregnancy, the messages. I still can't believe she planned all of that." "She was desperate," Tu Tieu replied softly. "Desperation makes people do strange, dangerous things. But now everything's out in the open. It's over." Uri turned to her, his voice low. "Thank you for not doubting me, even for a second." "I knew the truth," she said simply. "I know who you are." That reassurance settled something deep inside him. He reached over and intertwined his fingers with hers. "I'm sorry you got dragged into it." "We both did," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But we'll get through it." And for a moment, they simply breathed together, letting the storm pass. Meanwhile, across town, Ms. Lynn and Lynn walked in silence. The streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and Lynn's breaths came in quiet, uneven gasps. She kept wiping her face, but the tears returned faster than she could stop them. Ms. Lynn didn't scold her, didn't push her, didn't demand explanations. She simply guided her home like a mother guiding a child who had lost her way. Once inside, Lynn sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking. Ms. Lynn closed the door gently behind her and sat down beside her, but not too close, giving her space, but not abandonment. "Lynn," she began, voice quiet but firm, "I need you to tell me something. How long have you been feeling this way about Uri?" A long pause followed, before Lynn finally whispered, "Since the day he helped me move after my accident. I thought he cared. I thought maybe someday he would look at me the way he looks at her. But he never did," Ms. Lynn said softly. Lynn nodded slowly, crying again. "No, he never did. And I hated that. I hated feeling invisible. I hated feeling like everyone chose her over me, even you." Ms. Lynn's heart cracked a little at that. She reached out and gently held Lynn's hand. "Oh, child, I never chose her over you. You're my daughter, but I cannot choose for someone's heart. Uri never belonged to you, not because you weren't enough, but because love cannot be forced." Lynn trembled, her voice breaking. "I just wanted him to see me, even once." "But you didn't want him to see you," Ms. Lynn replied gently. "You wanted him to love you. And that's an entirely different thing." The truth struck something deep inside Lynn, and she collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing without restraint. Ms. Lynn held her tightly. "You must face what you've done. You hurt people who trusted you. You hurt yourself. But this doesn't make you unlovable. It means you need help, guidance, and time to heal." Lynn didn't argue. For the first time, she didn't fight or deny or justify anything. She simply cried, because now she finally understood the depth of the damage she'd caused. Back at the house, Uri and Tu Tieu finally moved to prepare for the night. Their baby, sensing the tension earlier, had been unusually fussy, but now he slept soundly. Uri leaned over the crib, brushing a soft strand of hair off his son's forehead. "Even he felt it," Uri said quietly. Babies always know, Tu Tieu replied, giving a small, tired smile. Uri looked at her seriously. Are you sure you're okay? She nodded. I'm more worried about you. I'll be fine, he said, though his shoulders still carried a weight he wasn't used to. I just hate that someone felt they had to destroy us to feel better. Tu Tieu took his hand again. We're not destroyed. He squeezed back, grateful. No, thanks to you. They climbed into bed, holding each other close. Neither said it, but both felt it, a quiet fear lingering underneath everything. Not fear of Lynn coming back, not fear of another lie, but fear of the emotional scars this night had left behind. They slept lightly. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Ms. Land's kitchen table. Lynn sat with a cup of warm tea she barely touched. Her eyes were swollen, but her breathing was steadier. The emotional storm had settled into a heavy calm. Ms. Lynn sat opposite her, speaking gently but clearly. This can't continue. Starting today, you're staying with me. And tomorrow, I'll help you arrange counseling. A professional can help you work through these feelings. Jealousy, insecurity, attachment. These things don't disappear on their own. Lynn nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. And you will not go near Uri and Tu Tieu for a while, Ms. Lynn added. Not until you understand what boundaries are and why they matter. Lynn swallowed hard. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? Forgiveness isn't the question, Ms. Lynn answered. The question is whether you will forgive yourself enough to grow. Lynn closed her eyes, absorbing the words. It hurt, but it also felt right. I want to try, she whispered. That's enough for now, Ms. Lynn said, touching her hand. Outside the window, morning carried on as usual. Birds chirped, cars passed. Life continued. Inside, however, something had finally begun to shift. Later that afternoon, Uri stood outside watering the small garden by the front porch. The air felt clearer today, like the world had reset itself. Tu Tieu stepped out beside him, watching him quietly. How are you feeling? She asked. He considered the question for a moment. Lighter, still tired, but lighter. She smiled softly. Good. Uri looked at her with a seriousness that made her pause. Whatever happens next, I want to face it with you. Nothing will ever change that. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I know. Together, they stood there as the sunlight warmed their skin. Two people who had just walked through a storm, but refused to let it break them. Their home felt safe again. Their hearts felt aligned again. The danger was gone, but the lesson would stay with all of them for a long time. Love cannot be forced. Trust cannot be faked. And no matter how fierce the storm, a family built on honesty will always survive. In this episode, Tu Tieu and Uri finally enjoy a peaceful life with their newborn after months of chaos. Until an unexpected visitor shatters the calm. Lynn arrives with swollen eyes and an emotional confession. She has secretly loved Uri for years. When Uri gently rejects her, she desperately claims she's pregnant with his child, sending shockwaves through the room. But everything unravels when Ms. Lynn, her adoptive mother, accidentally reads messages on Lynn's phone revealing the truth. The pregnancy was staged, the evidence fabricated. Heartbroken and disappointed, Mrs. Lynn confronts Lynn, who breaks down, admitting she only wanted Uri to notice her. With the truth exposed, Lynn is taken home to face the consequences. Uri and Tu Tieu stand stronger than ever, proving that real love cannot be shaken by lies or manipulation.